Good morning. To understand what makes the modern world work, we must first understand how we arrived here. For millennia, the fundamental conditions of human life, our relationship with energy, food, and mortality, changed very little. Then, in a span ranging from 2 centuries in the West to mere decades in Asia, everything changed. This is not a story of linear progress, but of what I term epochal transitions. Reference the imagery before you. On the left, the agrarian reality that defined 99% of human history, a world of organic limitations. On the right, the post-industrial metropolis, defined by energy density and complexity. Over the next 15 minutes, we will explore the, quote, concatenated series of rapid transitions that bridged this divide. We will analyze how demographic, agricultural, energy, and economic shifts interacted synergistically to create our modern quotidian realities. And we will confront the environmental cost of this acceleration. We must strip away our modern bias to appreciate the inertia of the pre-modern world. As the supplementary data indicates, for the first millennium of the Common Era, global economic growth averaged a mere 0.01% annually. At that rate, it would take 7 millennia to double the economic product. This was a world defined by profound limits. Energy was animate, derived from human and animal muscle, supplemented inefficiently by biomass like wood and dung. As noted in the text, even as late as the 1820s, the speed of land transport had not surpassed the horse-drawn speeds achieved by the bowtie culture in 3500 BCE. Whether in Han Dynasty China or the Roman Empire, life was governed by exigencies recognizable to ancestors living thousands of years prior. This was not a lack of ingenuity, but a thermodynamic ceiling. Without high-density energy, growth remained imperceptibly slow, and population levels remained tethered to the carrying capacity of traditional agriculture. The unlocking of this inertia was not singular. It was a concatenated series of 5 distinct yet highly interdependent transitions. First, the demographic transition, shifting from high fertility and high mortality to the stabilization we see today. Second, the agricultural transition, the revolution in how we produce calories, moving from subsistence to surplus. Third, and perhaps the driver of them all, the energy transition, the shift from biomass and muscle to fossil fuels and electricity. Fourth, the economic transition, the divergence from subsistence farming to globalized industrial and service economies. And finally, the fifth transition, the environmental consequences of the first 4. As we proceed, remember that these are not isolated verticals. You cannot have the economic transition without the energy density of fossil fuels. You cannot have the demographic transition without the agricultural surplus to lower mortality. They are a single, complex system. Let us humanize these mechanics through the lens of 19th century France. Consider a mother born in the 1810s, perhaps in a village in central France. Her life was a carbon copy of her ancestors 3 centuries prior, living in a leaky thatched house, burning gleaned wood for warmth, and, as noted by travelers like James Cobbett, literally carrying dung upon her back to fertilize fields by hand. Now, contrast this with her son, born a generation later, living in the 1870s. He inhabits the world of the Impressionists, Caillebott's rainy Paris streets. He lives in a Haussmann Boulevard apartment, travels by train, and his son will eventually use electricity and the metro. In just 2 generations, the existential experience of being human shifted from medieval subsistence to modern urbanity. This creates a psychological chasm between generations that had never existed before in human history. If France experienced this shift over a century, China compressed it into a single lifetime. Consider a grandmother born in Anhui in 1945. She survived the Great Famine of 1959 to 1961, a man-made catastrophe born of failed policy, which devastated her village. Her reality was pre-modern, defined by scarcity and existential risk. Now, look at her grandson, born in 1990. He might live in Vancouver or Shanghai, driving a luxury vehicle, his life decoupled from the soil. As the text notes, what took France a century to accomplish was done in China in less than 2 generations. This trajectory is unique because it began from incomparably deeper depths, the existential nadir of the greatest famine in history, and ascended to the heights of global capital. This illustrates the, quote, late starter's advantage, the ability to adopt technologies and systems instantly, compressing the transition curve. The demographic transition is the foundation of the modern social structure. Historically, high fertility was a necessity to validate the high mortality rates. As Chateaubriand wrote of his pre-revolutionary family, multiple infant deaths were the norm. A woman might bear 6 children, yet the population would barely grow. The transition occurs when mortality rates plummet due to sanitation and nutrition, while fertility rates initially remain high, causing the population explosion seen in the graph's vertical ascent. Eventually, fertility adjusts downward. Today, in affluent nations, we see fertility rates dropping below replacement levels. Concurrently, we have shifted from a rural species to an urban one, with over 50% of humanity now living in cities. This curve, from stagnation to hyperbolic growth to a new plateau, is the signature of the modern era. The agricultural and energy transitions are functionally inseparable. Pre-modern agriculture was a low-yield energy trap. Greater than 90% of calories came from plants, and cereal yields were often below 1 ton per hectare. The energy shift, moving from inefficient biomass, wood/dung, to high-density fossil fuels, allowed us to break this trap. We applied energy to agriculture through synthetic fertilizers, made via natural gas, pesticides, and diesel-powered mechanization. This resulted in a 10-fold increase in yields. We effectively turned fossil fuels into food. This eliminated harvest failure famines in the developed world and allowed for the massive urbanization of the population, as fewer hands were needed on the land. We moved from animate power muscles to the combustion of ancient sunlight. The economic transition is best visualized by the divergence graph. For 1,800 years, global growth was stagnant. The Industrial Revolution, powered by the energy transition, triggered a vertical explosion in GDP per capita. But looking deeper, the structure lines of the economy transformed. As shown in the inset chart, the U.S. economy in 1870 was dominated by agriculture. By 2020, agriculture is a sliver of the chart, replaced by industry and, overwhelmingly, services. This transition, from subsistence farming to globalized trade and service sectors, was enabled by the liberation of labor from the fields. We moved from local inputs and luxury trade to a system where international trade comprises nearly half of the world's economic product. Transitions follow a logistic function, an S-shaped trajectory. They do not happen overnight. Consider the transition from draft horses to internal combustion engines in the U.S. The first tractors and cars appeared in the 1890s. Logic suggests the horse population should have immediately declined. Instead, it rose for another 2 decades, peaking in 1917 at 26.6 million animals. Why? Because the new system, cars, stimulated the economy, requiring more traditional transport, horses, for the last mile until the new infrastructure fully matured. The rapid decline only began after the peak, completing the transition by 1957. This teaches us a crucial lesson. The old system often reaches its maximum extent just as the new system is taking root. Transitions are characterized by a slow start, a period of coexistence, and then a rapid acceleration to a new plateau. Not every technical innovation triggers a successful epochal transition. We must recognize false starts. In 1899, electric cars outsold gasoline cars in the U.S. They were cleaner and quieter. Yet, due to energy density limits of batteries, a problem Edison failed to solve despite years of effort, the electric car went extinct by 1907. It is only resurfacing today, a century later. Similarly, nuclear power was promised in 1954 to be "too cheap to meter." It was expected to dominate global electricity. Instead, its share peaked at 16.8% in 1987 and has been in structural decline since, currently sitting around 10%. These examples remind us that technical superiority on paper does not guarantee a successful transition. Cost, complexity, and physical constraints often truncate the S-curve. The result of these transitions is a modern inheritance of deep contradictions. On the positive ledger, we have largely eliminated famine, drastically reduced infant mortality, and provided access to virtually unlimited information. We have generated unprecedented household wealth. However, the negative ledger is weighty. We face the burdens of aging populations and increasing international income disparities. We see a concentration of wealth where luxury skyscrapers rise above slums, a visual metaphor for the uneven distribution of the transition's benefits. Furthermore, we face a surfeit of misinformation and social fragmentation. This is the paradox of modernity. We have solved the problem of scarcity, only to replace it with the problems of distribution and excess. The first 4 transitions were predicated on the massive exploitation of Earth's resources. The fifth transition is the reckoning. We are now navigating a shift defined by environmental consequences. This manifests in two ways. First, ubiquitous degradation, local issues like soil erosion, deforestation, and pollution that occur everywhere. Second, and more dangerously, truly global impacts, the distribution of anthropogenic compounds worldwide, leading to climate change. As the text states, global climate change is, quote, by far the most important outcome, because its unchecked continuation threatens the habitability of the planet. This is not just an externality, it is a fundamental shift in the state of the biosphere, directly caused by the energy and economic success of the previous transitions. We end with the unresolved question of the 21st century. We face a moral imperative to extend the benefits of the demographic, agricultural, and economic transitions to the billions of people still living in pre-modern conditions. Yet this quest makes it vastly harder to manage the fifth transition, preserving a biosphere already under siege. The dilemma is stark. The management of this environmental transition will determine the ultimate success or failure of the entire modernization experiment. At this point, as Smil notes, it is impossible to say if we will succeed. Our challenge is to decouple human flourishing from environmental degradation, ensuring that the great acceleration does not end in a sudden stop.